Hey, you already know our channel, and if you are visiting us for the first time, I invite you to get to know all of our content. Today we're going to talk about Paul's letter to the Philippians. And this letter was addressed to the Christians who were in this city, and as the name suggests, it was founded by a man named Philip II, who was a Greek ruler, in fact, father of Alexander the Great, one of the most famous names in all of history. Philippus was in Macedonia in Europe, and Paul passed through it during the beginning of his second missionary journey. And there in Philippus, we know that Paul soon met Lydia, a seller of purple, therefore a very rich woman, and presented the gospel to her, and she was converted. She became the first convert in the history of Christianity in the European continent. While he was still in Philippus, Paul was arrested. God then sent an earthquake and freed Paul and Silas from prison in a wonderful and miraculous way. And because of that, he could also present salvation to the jailer, the famous jailer of Philippus. And that man, together with his whole family, received salvation from Jesus on that day. So, in Philippus, Paul experienced extreme situations of joy and hardship. And it is exactly because he experienced such extreme situations and passed through them with ease that he wrote at the end of this letter that he could do all things in Christ who strengthened him. Sometimes we see this verse taken out of context, but when Paul says this, he is saying that he knew how to be humbled and how to be honored. The reason why Paul wrote this letter was because one of the brothers from Philippus sent him a financial offering. The one who sent this offering to Paul was a man from that church named Epaphroditus, and it is interesting that this man was of great value to Paul. In all his letters, Paul mentions dozens of people who contributed to the gospel, but none of them is praised as much as Epaphroditus. He was a man whom Paul loved and was a faithful companion in his struggles. He was an upright servant of Jesus. He was someone who loved God, loved Paul, loved his church, and for this reason he was also praised by the Apostle Paul. The letter to the Philippians is known as the Epistle of Joy. This is because this word and encouragement to the Philippians to rejoice appears about 15 times in this book, even though it is very short with only 4 small chapters. But what really gets our attention is that this is one of the epistles Paul wrote when he was arrested. It's part of the prison letters written by Paul when he was in Rome in house arrest, as it is written by the end of the book of Acts. And it makes us wonder, how can someone who is imprisoned for preaching the gospel, therefore innocently imprisoned, be able to have joy and speak so much life of so much joy to other people? This can only be explained because Paul had Jesus in his heart, and the joy that Jesus offers us, it is a true joy that nothing and no one can take away. It is a joy that does not depend on the circumstances, because it is a joy that comes from the inside out, and it does not reach us from the outside to the inside. This is a joy that you and I need to experience as well. A joy that doesn't dance according to the song that is playing at the moment. A joy that remains everlasting, remains constant in our hearts because its source is Jesus. And even if circumstances change, the joy in our hearts will remain because Jesus is the real and true and only source of the greatest joy. The apostle affirms that his imprisonment was being useful for the church because many brothers and sisters, seeing his devotion and firm faith in God, despite being imprisoned because of it, had their faith strengthened and were encouraged to also preach the gospel with boldness. And in addition, Paul says that his imprisonment gave him the opportunity to preach the gospel to all the guards, since there was a rotation of several of them taking care of the apostle. So whenever a new guard came up to take care of Paul, he would present them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. In this way, all the guard in Rome was reached by the gospel of Jesus Christ. This shows us how Paul could see difficult situations from a positive side. It's what we say about learning to think theologically. It's knowing that God is in control of all things, that even unpleasant things that come our way can bring and offer us some reward, something positive. And by having our faith firm in God and looking at things from a divine and not a human viewpoint, with a spiritual and not material view, with a more comprehensive and not so fixed view, that we will be able to understand the benefits that suffering actually brings us. And we will be able to extract precious lessons for ourselves and for those around us. This is one of the most personal letters of the Apostle Paul, and it is also one of his least doctrinal letters. But it is a very beautiful letter with several verses and texts known to us, such as the one that says that he who began a good work in us is faithful to complete it. Also, the fantastic description about the humiliation and exaltation of Jesus, when he says that we need to have the same feeling that he had. For although he was like God, he did not cling to this, but gave up all his glory, became a man like us, died the death of cross, and today has received a name that is above every name. And one day before him, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that he is the Christ, to the glory of God. It is here that we also find Paul affirming that he advances toward the goal, forgetting the things that are left behind, because he has before him the prize of God's sovereign calling in Christ Jesus. He says here also that all that he had and considered as gain, he considered as dung and as lost, because what he most wanted to retain was the knowledge of Christ. It is also in this letter that he says that all our questions need to be known before God with all prayer and supplication, so that we do not need to be anxious about anything. We need not to be anxious about anything, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. We must also think about everything that is good and everything that is useful and everything that is right. But before so many beautiful and well-known verses, I would like to highlight the one in chapter 1, verse 21, when Paul says, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." When we are sure that our life is in the hands of Jesus, we do not fear death. And it becomes not the end of our story. Death is just a curve we make in the road. The death for the one who believes in Jesus is a gain, a profit. But death is only a profit for those who live in Christ and for those who live for Christ. So may we live in such a way that we do not fear death, and that on the day we have to face it, we can face it with confidence, with tranquility, with a smile on our faces, knowing that for those who live in Christ, death is not the end. Death is not suffering. Death is actually a reward. It's a gain, and it's a profit. Now, if you liked the summary and highlights, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. I hope to see you next week. Every week we have a new video with a new book of the Bible. And God bless you. Bye-bye.